Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Indian troops have martyred 2 more Kashmiri youths in occupied Kashmir. The occupation forces targeted the civilians during a cordon and search operation in the Kariri area of the Baramulla district. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's curfew and communication blackout for the past 379 days. China has welcomed Russia's proposed summit of the world leaders to discuss a US bid to extend the UN arms embargo on Iran. In a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Washington's hegemonic behavior will not succeed. Earlier, the US said it will trigger a snapback mechanism to reimpose sanctions on Iran after losing its bid to extend the embargo at the UN. The US has slapped China's Huawei with further sanctions limiting its access to computer chips and other technology. In a statement, the Commerce Department said 38 Huawei affiliates around the world have been added to the US government's economic blacklist. Washington has already banned Huawei from 5G wireless networks, accusing the company of undermining its national security. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Indian troops have martyred 2 more Kashmiri youths in the occupied Kashmir. The occupation forces martyred the civilians during a cordon and search operation in the Kariri area of Baramulla district. Indian forces have martyred more than 215 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked Article 370 and stripped the region of its autonomy in August last year. Occupied Kashmir has been under a strict curfew and communications blackout since then. Hundreds of politicians and civil society activists have also been detained by the occupation forces. Pakistan has repeatedly condemned the extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris in fake encounters by the Indian troops. China has welcomed Russia's proposed summit of the world leaders to discuss a US bid to extend the UN arms embargo on Iran. This comes as the US said it will trigger a snapback mechanism to reimpose sanctions on Iran after losing its bid to extend the embargo at the UN. In a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Washington's hegemonic behavior will not succeed. He said the failure of the US resolution has once again showed that unilateralism has no popular support. The spokesperson urged Washington to end its unilateral sanctions and adopt a rational attitude. The US has slapped China's Huawei with further sanctions limiting its access to computer chips and other technology. In a statement, the Commerce Department said 38 Huawei affiliates around the world have been added to the US government's economic blacklist. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said Huawei and its affiliates have worked through third parties to harness US technology. He said it has been done in a manner that undermines US national security and foreign policy interests. Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the new sanctions were imposed to protect the integrity of the US 5G infrastructure from Beijing's influence. Washington has already banned Huawei from 5G wireless networks in the US, fearing it as a national security threat. Israel says its tanks have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas posts in retaliation to incendiary balloon attacks. The raids come after dozens of Palestinians staged protests against the occupying forces along the border fence. No casualties have been reported from the raids so far. Meanwhile, Israeli forces also shot and wounded a Palestinian in Bethlehem. The Defense Ministry says the forces opened fire near Rachel's tomb in the city. Israeli strikes on Palestine have accelerated since the signing of the peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates last week. Moreover, Israel says it will sign a deal to start normalizing ties with Sudan in the near future. The Israeli intelligence minister said the pact with Sudan is expected to be signed before the new year. Ali Cohen said Bahrain and Oman could also be the next Gulf countries to follow the United Arab Emirates in formalizing ties with Israel. The UAE is the first Gulf state and third Arab nation to establish full diplomatic ties with Israel after Egypt and Jordan. Despite reports that the deal halted Israeli annexation of the West Bank, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the seizure plans are not off the table. Palestinian groups denounced the deal, saying it does nothing to serve the Palestinian cause and ignores their rights. Iraq says a Katyusha rocket has struck Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone, which houses foreign missions, including the U.S. consulate. The military said the rocket was fired from an abandoned military base in southeastern Baghdad. It said there were no significant losses. The military added that Iraqi security forces seized 2 other rockets at the launch site. The attack was at least the 9th within a week, which was apparently aimed at U.S. interest in Iraq. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack. Syria says one of its soldiers was killed after 2 U.S. helicopters attacked an army checkpoint in the northeastern region. State media said 2 other troops were injured in the raid near the Kurdish-held city of Qamishli. The outlet said the incident happened shortly after a U.S. patrol was prevented from passing by an army checkpoint in the area. Northeastern Syria is mainly under the control of U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, spearheaded by Kurdish fighters. Syrian army forces are deployed in certain locations under agreements with the Kurds. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan call for a permanent ceasefire in Libya. Speaking over the phone, the 2 leaders discussed the overall situation in the war-torn country. Meanwhile, Turkey and Qatar's defense ministers visited Tripoli amid efforts to secure a ceasefire in the divided country. In a meeting, they agreed to strengthen cooperation with Libya's UN-backed government. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is also on a surprise visit to Libya. He urged the United Arab Emirates to use its influence over Commander Khalifa Haftar to help resolve the conflict. Libya has been mired in turmoil since the toppling of strongman Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko says he is willing to change the constitution to share power amid the unrest in the country, while opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya suggests she is ready to lead the country in order to restore normality. Her statement comes after tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in Minsk to protest against the alleged rigging in the presidential vote. More in this report.
Belarus is navigating one of the biggest political crises in its post-Soviet history after the opposition rejected official results of the presidential election. In a video address, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya urged security and law enforcement officers to switch sides from President Alexander Lukashenko's government.
I'm prepared to take responsibility and act as the nation's leader during this period so the country settles down and gets back to normality, so that we can release all political prisoners and prepare a legal framework and conditions to hold another round of presidential elections in the shortest time possible. Genuine, fair and transparent elections that will be accepted without question by the international community.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, speaking at a rally of his supporters in Minsk, rejected calls to hold a new president election. He called the opponents as rats and urged his supporters to defend their country and independence. President Lukashenko also accused NATO of massing on his country's western border, which the alliance has dismissed, saying it is closely monitoring the situation in the country.
NATO tanks and jets are on standby within 15 minutes reach of our borders. This is not for nothing. NATO forces are rattling tank tracks at our doors. Military power is building up on the western border of our country. Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and unfortunately our brother Ukraine, its leadership are telling us to hold a new election.
Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron tweeted the European Union should support peaceful demonstrations in Belarus. German Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister Olaf Scholz described the Belarusian leader as a dictator. He warned Moscow against intervening to keep Lukashenko in power. The UK has also rejected Belarus's election results, saying it was fraudulent.
The EU has called for a transparent probe into reports of abuse and mistreatment of protesters detained in Belarus. In a statement, the bloc's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, calls for the release of all unlawfully detained people. He said the peaceful demonstrators have clear demands and the government must respect it. Borrell said the Belarusian population wants change and the EU stands by them. Earlier, European Council President Charles Michel summoned an emergency summit on Wednesday to discuss the presidential election in Belarus. In a tweet, Michel said the people of Belarus have the right to decide on their future and freely elect their leader. Moving on, Brazil has registered 620 deaths from COVID-19 and over 23,000 infections in the past 24 hours. While in the US, more than 170,000 people have lost their lives to the coronavirus, with over 5.4 million confirmed cases. Now, globally, the pandemic has infected over 21.6 million people and claimed more than 775,000 lives. This report has more.
With thousands of deaths and infections every day, the coronavirus continues to overwhelm healthcare systems across the world. In the US, top infection disease expert Anthony Fauci says any attempt to attain herd immunity will result in massive death tolls in the country. Despite reporting the second highest death toll and infection tally in the region, Mexico says a vaccine can be made available by the first quarter of 2021. Brazilian First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro has tested negative for the virus after testing positive 2 weeks prior. While down under, Australia reported its deadliest day of the pandemic with 25 fatalities in the past 24 hours.
We've got a common challenge here, and whilst there is a trend that is positive, today is a very sad day for 25 families, and this is a long way from over.
In Europe, the second wave is surging in many countries, including Germany and France. Meanwhile, in Spain, thousands took to the streets to protest against the mandatory use of face masks in public spaces.
I'm here because there are too many repressive measures. They are taking all our rights away from us. In my opinion, the face mask should have been used during the pandemic, but not now.
In Asia, mainland China reported 22 new cases of the virus in the past 24 hours, while in South Korea, 197 fresh cases were registered. Meanwhile, Malaysia has detected a mutation of the COVID-19 virus in the country.
Moreover, in India, the deaths from COVID-19 have neared 51,000 as the country reported 941 deaths in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says 57,982 new cases were recorded overnight, taking the country's caseload over 2.6 million. It said there are still over 676,000 active cases in the country. The ministry said the two states, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, make up to 40% of the all confirmed cases. India is the third worst hit country from the coronavirus after the US and Brazil. Meanwhile, Pakistan is witnessing a downward trend in the new COVID-19 cases as health experts believe in the country's promising survival rate. The Health Ministry said over 90% of the patients have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said 7 people have died, while 488 people tested positive in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has risen to 6,175, while the infections are over 289,000. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to over 13,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 126,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 95,000 cases. Moving on to New Zealand, where Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has delayed the general elections till October the 17th after a second COVID-19 wave. Speaking at a news conference in Wellington, Ardern said the 4-week delay will give sufficient time for parties to plan campaigns accordingly. She said these decisions are still subject to scrutiny by the Parliament. Ardern said he had absolutely no intention of allowing any further delays to the vote. She said the postponement will also help the Election Commission finalising the results.
I have decided on balance to move the election by 4 weeks to the 17th of October. At the end of last week, I was advised that this date is achievable and presents no greater risk than had we retained the status quo. I've also been advised that in moving to a 17 October election day, the Commission will be able to leverage and draw on much of the work already undertaken to deliver the election.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Somalia, at least 16 people have been killed and over a dozen others injured in a gun and bomb attack by Al-Shabaab militants on a beachfront hotel in the capital Mogadishu. The Information Ministry said security forces ended the 4-hour-long siege after killing the last attacker. It says special forces rescued 205 people, including the hotel owner and government officials. A government spokesperson said 5 of the people killed were the attackers, while 1 police officer was killed in the rescue operation. Earlier, Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack in a statement posted online. In Colombia, 8 people have been shot dead by unknown gunmen in a drug trafficking area in the Nariño province near the border with Ecuador. Police said attackers wore balaclavas to cover their faces and carried long-range weapons. Colombian President Ivan Duque has condemned the attack. He blamed it on the presence of militias and drug trafficking groups in the area. He said 2 arrests have been made and these facts will be clarified later. Four people have been killed while 14 others wounded in a spate of shootings across the American city of Cincinnati. The bloodshed began at midnight after 3 people were shot in the Walnut Hills neighborhood. Police also responded to 2 other shooting reports in the Avondale area and over the Rhine neighborhood during the night. Police did not provide details about the 4th fatal shooting, but confirmed that it occurred on the city's west end. They said the shootings seemed to be separate incidents, but horrific and tragic. No suspect information has been made available by the police in any of the cases. In the US, firefighters have scrambled to protect thousands of homes from wildfire racing through bush-covered mountains north of Los Angeles. The wildfire has forced hundreds of evacuations and burned dozens of structures in the city. The blaze, dubbed the Lake Fire, has already destroyed 15,000 acres after erupting last week in the Angeles National Forest. According to local media reports, the fire is 12% contained. 63 people have died so far from the torrential rains and floods in Sudan since July, with thousands more forced to flee their homes. The Interior Ministry said over 14,000 homes and 119 public buildings were destroyed. Heavy rains usually fall in Sudan from June to October, and it faces severe flooding every year. The UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs estimates that over 185,000 people have been affected by the floods, with more rainfall expected in coming months. The OCHA said 17 out of 18 states across the country have been affected by flooding and landslides. The states of Jazeera and Kassala remain the most affected in the east of the North African country. China has awarded the country's first COVID-19 vaccine patent to CanSino Biologics. State media said it is the first COVID-19 vaccine patent granted by China. It said the patent for the coronavirus vaccine was issued on August the 11th. CanSino said it is also in talks with Russia, Brazil and Chile to launch phase 3 trials in those countries. CanSino's Hong Kong shares rose around 14%. and its Shanghai shares rose by 6.6% following the announcement. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia said it plans to begin phase 3 of the clinical trials for the CanSino vaccine this month. In southwest China, the world's oldest panda in captivity celebrated its 38th birthday in the zoo of Chongqing municipality. Her age is comparable to a human age of about 110 to 140 years old. More in this report.
Xinjing, the giant panda, is celebrating her birthday at a zoo in China. She is among less than the 30 pandas in captivity that have an age of over 30. Many local residents and fans came to the zoo to jointly make a big cake out of various fruits and bamboo shoots and leaves and sing birthday songs. Despite her great age, Xinjing maintained a good body with her weight controlled at 95 to 100 kgs. The Chongqing Zoo specially made a recipe for her age to let her have more meals a day but less food at each.
We have 3 to 4 staff members taking care of her, and other staff offer help at any time. We usually cut bamboo leaves into pieces before feeding her. We want to maintain Xinjing's weight at a suitable level so as to prevent such diseases as obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, and high blood sugar, among others.
Chongqing is known as an oven city during summer. To fend off the summer heat, zoo staff only let Xinjing go outside the panda house in the morning or evening.
We have built a pond outdoors so that she can swim in it. We also often prepare cooling fruits for her to eat, such as watermelons.
Xinjing has given birth to 10 baby pandas so far. As of the end of 2019, she had 153 descendants who live in more than 20 countries and regions, including Canada, America, Japan, and China's Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Shanghai.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Iran says the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries has managed to raise crude prices and stabilize the oil market. The Iranian Interior Ministry said the oil price has risen from $16 in May to $45 and has stabilized. OPEC and allies, including Russia, agreed on record output cuts to tackle the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Iran's Interior Minister said the oil industry has signed 13 contracts worth roughly 1.5 billion euros with 14 local firms. In 2018, US President Donald Trump pulled out of Iran's 2015 nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions that have sharply cut Iran's oil exports. Fearing US penalties, foreign companies have stayed away from investing in Iran. The Japanese economy has shrunk at its fastest rate on record as the country fights to control the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's third largest economy shrank an annualized 27.8% during April to June from the previous quarter. Japan saw its gross domestic product fall by 7.8% in the second quarter. The slump marks the biggest decline for Japan's economy since comparable data became available in 1980. One of the main factors behind the slump was a severe decrease in domestic consumption, which accounts for more than half of Japan's economy. Exports also fell sharply as global trade took a hit by the pandemic.
We declared a state of emergency in April and May, when it was weighed heavily for the April to June quarter. We have artificially stopped economic activities, so this tough result comes from that impact.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says remittances to the country in July reached the highest ever recorded in a month. Khan said the payments were recorded at $2.768 billion last month. He said 12.2% increase was recorded over June 2020 and 36.5% increase over July 2019. Khan called the development positive for Pakistan's economy. The central bank attributed the increase to an orderly exchange rate and lowered remittance transaction threshold. Wall Street's main indexes opened higher as retailers prepare to wind down a better-than-feared quarterly earnings season. The S&P 500 is trading higher by about 0.25%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading marginally lower. The Nasdaq Composite Index is trading higher by about 0.5%. European markets are trading mixed with geopolitical tensions and concerns of the spread of the coronavirus on investors' radar. But investors are closely following escalating Sino-US tensions that are weighing on investor sentiment. Frankfurt's DAX has gained nearly 0.5%, while CAC 40 in Paris is trading up by a fraction. London's FTSE 100 has gained close to 0.5%. In Asia, mainland and Chinese stocks were higher on the day. The Shanghai Composite jumped 2.34%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 0.65%. Japan's Nikkei 225 slipped 0.83%. Shares in Australia declined with S&P ASX 200 down 0.81%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained over 0.5%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.